Hello, everyone. Welcome. We will give it a minute for people to filter in. We're really excited. We have a few hundred people who are here, so it's going to take about 30 seconds for everyone to come in. I'm already seeing love in the chat. I love it. Yes, it's a celebration. We're going to do our best to talk about anticipating live, making it as participatory as possible. Wonderful. Thank you all for being here. We will give it another 30 seconds and then we're going to get started. Thank you for those who are on the East Coast and joining us after hours. And thanks for people in other time zones who are joining us midday. All right. I think it's time. My name is Nora Benavides. I am so thrilled to be here with my colleague Vanessa Maria Graber. We are here as the trainers for anticipating election lies before and after Election Day. This is part of the Democracy Is initiative, an effort held by over 24 allies in the democracy space fighting for facts and freedom this election cycle. I'm really thrilled for our agenda today. I'll briefly walk you through it and then we'll dive in. So first, we'll do just some housekeeping and ground rules. We'll talk then about understanding disinformation and manipulation. We'll talk through anticipated lies, both old and new, this election cycle. I will then hand it over to my tremendous colleague, Vanessa Maria, who I hope will at least get to say hello now before I dive in. She'll talk about best practices and tactics for the press. That is how to apply these tactics to anticipated lies. We'll talk about critical dates, what's ahead, what to expect. I call these like critical democracy dates. And then we'll talk a little bit about resources and what Free Press is doing and others in the field to support democracy. So, just some housekeeping items. You'll note that we have the Q&A function here. That is something that we will be monitoring on the back end throughout the presentation and the training. If you have questions, please ask, and we will make sure to try to address those towards the end. This is on the record as a training. It will be featured eventually on our YouTube page, probably in the next day or so. That's up to our tech luminaries. I am not one of them. So keep in mind, if there are questions that we read aloud, those will be on the record. And we're thrilled to have all of you here. There are a lot of you, and we're really excited to dive in. So let's get started. And I want to give Vanessa Maria an opportunity to just say hello before I dive into some of the basics of understanding disinformation.
Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Vanessa Maria Graber. I'm super happy to be here with my colleague Nora and to be able to share this important information with you all. I am the News Voices Director, and it's an initiative where we work together with community members and journalists to make sure the community's information needs are met. And I also do research on civic journalism. So really happy to be with you here today. And again, if you have questions, just put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them throughout the presentation. Thanks so much.
We wanted to start with some of the basics about understanding the threat of disinformation. And I realize that for many of you here, you're incredibly seasoned professionals. You understand this phenomenon, you understand that it is not new. But it's important for those that are newer to understanding disinformation to hear a little bit about the ways that disinformation affects communities, democracies, and our sense of selves and our sense of community. The scope of the problem has expanded in recent years, and I would say that's due to a number of factors. The rise in the digital age has shifted how and where we get information. Our information consumption used to largely be through various traditional media avenues. And over time, we've learned that most Americans actually use social media as a gateway of some sort to getting their critical, local, and urgent information. When we get information from social media, there are a number of ways that that is targeted specifically to us. And once that happens, you and I, Vanessa, Maria, and I may have different facts that we're living with. So I often say that disinformation divides us by design. The effect is to build distrust, to make people believe that they have different interests, care about different things, and different beliefs. And when we really do exist in these different kinds of realities with different facts, it's harder and harder to come together on issues of the day, to make decisions together about what matters. Disinformation is also highly local. We'll talk a little bit in a moment about the ways that disinformation reaches us, the supply and the demand. But at the end of the day, it's about what reaches each of you and how vulnerable and salient the narratives might be for people when they take those in. So, knowing that disinformation can be highly local, I know that disinformation about elections is a particularly potent issue. And media can play a powerful role in fighting these lies, manipulation that have honestly become part and parcel of everyday life. So how do these various narratives manipulate us? We will get into the specific narratives that we are tracking at Free Press, that we anticipate and are already seeing in our social and traditional media ecosystems. But how does this all happen? Well, manipulation is everywhere. It's created, it's distributed by government actors, both foreign and domestic. That includes China, Russia, Iran, even homegrown disinformation here in the United States. And many of those government interference campaigns were studied following the 2016 election. Our Senate Intel Committee conducted a number of studies and worked with researchers that found that there was an overt and aggressive, sustained attempt, mostly by the Russian government, to intervene in the 2016 election, to persuade voters to support one candidate over another. And I think that this is the kind of interference campaign that remains, while layered on top various new tactics that we are seeing. We are seeing fake social media accounts created that look like someone we might know, sound like someone in our community, the kinds of things that really build implicit and easy trust for us. Meanwhile, we actually don't often remain on guard or skeptical of what those accounts are. We see that bots have been created in the millions to boost engagement, to make it seem like content online is viral or highly engaged with. And when that happens, our guards are down. We want to get in on it. We want to see what's happening. There is of course the rise of AI, that's automated and artificial intelligence that can create content at rapid speed, deep fake videos and images to make people believe that maybe a president has fallen down or another individual of note has said a certain thing. These are the kinds of things that when our guard is down, we might easily take in, believe, and then make a host of attitudinal shifts based on that. Political ads are also one of the key drivers that we see on social media, in our mailers. I don't know about you, but I've gotten dozens, I've collected dozens of pieces of real hard mail. These are political ads that are somehow encouraging me to vote one way or to be afraid. And so we have to be on guard in various ways. And then there is the rise of what we call pink slime websites. These are news websites, but they masquerade as credible news outlets and are really just light vectors to promote junk, low quality information and news. They collect our data online, sell it to other data brokers, and have done incredibly a terrible low job of giving people information that matters. Often those articles, if you click through on them, are no more than one or two sentences. And so there are all these various ways that lies and manipulation can reach us. And there are lots of thematic overlaps. Lies about COVID that might make someone feel like our government is somehow not to be trusted, that can really bleed into distrust about our elections, about election officials, our institutions. When you hear about a local, issue in your community, it could, of course, make you then think about all of the other ways that communities are being plagued by fake information. And the psychology here is incredibly hard to break. We're not going to, of course, get too deep into it. I love the psychology around why we believe lies. I'll just leave you with one brief tidbit about what we often call the illusory truth effect. And that is the more times that people hear a lie, the more likely they are to believe that it's real. And that means that for reporters, for news media professionals, there's a kind of conundrum. It's like, how do you cover these issues? How do you repeat a lie or avoid repeating a lie while debunking it? It's an incredibly difficult, tenuous topic. And so there's an entire psychological response that our brains have, the hormones that then get activated when we love what we see, when information confirms our own bias. And we want to help arm you with the tools to build trust for communities and debunk these lies. So let's really get into it. We've broken down some of what we think are these anticipated lies, and I'm going to call a lot of these here recycled lies. These are things we've seen before, and I'll be honest, they're not groundbreaking. These are things that if you've been covering the disinformation beat or, the election and democracy beat for years, you have seen this. And if you are a member of the public with any interest in issues of the day, you've seen these lies as well. I think one of the most basic lies we will see is about the voting process and the logistics. And I have some examples here in quotes. These are the types of things you might hear someone say, like, "Oh, I learned that my polling location changed. Oh, maybe Vanessa Maria sent me something and it's a link that's not real, but it means that early voting begins on November 1st. Wow, thanks, Vanessa Maria. I trust Vanessa Maria. She's wonderful. She's on it. Well, maybe she was slipped, she didn't check things, and that's how lies get embedded in our systems in the most innocuous way. There are then much more insidious ways as well. But the logistics themselves are a major part. I would say those are just part and parcel of the next 2, 3 weeks that we will see people understanding what might be considered fake information, lies, etc. There are also lies that cast doubt on our electoral system. And at the end of the day, they're all dangerous. And if someone sees a piece of information about their polling location that changed that is fake, that might prevent them from voting. Just as dangerous are the lies that are more insidious. Lies like, maybe my vote won't count. And we'll show you some examples of what that will look like eventually, just in the real world. Lies like, well, there's so much corruption, there's so much fraud, it's not even worth voting. Like, it won't even get counted. And then I think one of the most dangerous lies that we are already seeing being laid now is this lie that immigrants and other villains in our communities are being sent to the polls to vote illegally. That is false. There are statistically irrelevant examples of any kind of voter fraud, corruption, people engaging in voting twice in different states. And there's a really rich body of resources from partners like the Brennan Center and others that can help you debunk that. So I know Vanessa Maria will get into some of the tactics, but just so that you keep an eye on all of these are the things that will permeate. You may hear from community folks asking you, well, what about, the local election official in my county? Like, I think they're corrupt, so maybe I shouldn't vote. And understanding how you can then help debunk that, grapple with it in communities will be essential. The third recycled lie follows from what happened in the 2020 election. During the 2020 election and in the days that followed, Donald Trump asserted that the election was stolen from him. He said that there were various officials and others that had rigged the results, that special interests were motivating the results of the election. A number of states and local jurisdictions did a recount of their voting and tabulation process, only to find that in the end, the results of the 2020 election were with sweeping bipartisan agreement, confirmed, accurate, and with integrity. And so it's important to see that lies about election officials are actually kind of part of this lies portion that cast doubt on the electoral system. All of it, again, designed to divide us, to make us somehow feel like maybe we shouldn't engage in the process, and to villainize certain communities around the country. Here are some examples, and I'll be honest, Vanessa Maria is really our media professional. So I'm excited for her to talk a little bit about some of these. These are examples that she and I and others that we know have found that we've seen flagged both for social media companies, in our communities, etc. And it's really important when we show these examples, you'll see these red X marks. I tried to do different red X marks for every single image to keep it fun and spicy. But in your own reporting, if you want to include examples of these lies, help audiences, whether it's in cable news, in radio, in your print reporting, make sure that you highlight over and over when these claims are false. So this red X is to help denote that these are false images. The first one is a political ad that is on Twitter. It shows and claims that, quote, Dem poll workers in battleground states blatantly changed ballots from Trump to Biden. And then it has someone that looks like, I don't know, Dark Spider-Man with tons of ballots, shifting them all around and, villainously in his mask or her mask, changing ballots. So the presumption, of course, is that the system is rigged, that we have these corrupt officials, or that the systems themselves are so fragile, and that our poll workers, villainizing poll workers, are really, engaging in illegal conduct. That is not true, and it has not been documented. We've also seen examples like the one in the middle here. Are postal workers discarding mail in ballots in GOP dominated areas? And this one is part of some local news and TV coverage. And so it shows that, ballots were found in a storm drain. And it took hours and hours for people to track down and try to fact check what was really behind that story. Were these, ballots that had already been filled in? No, they had not been. And so this premise, like our vote won't count, these very well may have been left behind or dropped, but the nefarious conduct that seems to be suggested has never been discovered. And then the third example here is a picture of a poll worker in Georgia. I live and work in Georgia. Vanessa Maria lives and works in Pennsylvania, and she'll talk a little bit about that. These are hotbeds for, and testing ground for lies to embed themselves in communities. And one of the things here was this claim is that this woman walking around was a ballot mule. And so she was carrying ballots to different jurisdictions to, sway and manipulate the results. It ended up being that this woman was subject to intense harassment online. In years prior, because this was an example from years ago, flagged this for Facebook. These are the kinds of dangerous lies and images of real people that can have horrible results in the real world. More examples, and I don't want to dig too much into these for time, but again, these are various types of notices in the mail or otherwise that you'll see on television. On the right, there is an example from Twitter, a post, someone claiming that there are these voting machines that are breaking down and flipping voter selection. Again, this has been in the unique one-off instances where there have been voting machines that have broken down. Those are well reported, well documented, and statistically so insignificant that they don't even count as a percentage. You can't even say it's like 0.000001 of the entire voting machine process and their ability. So these are just some more examples. I put my nice red X over it. Thank you, Vanessa Maria, for the slide deck change. All right. Before I turn it over to Vanessa Maria, um, I wanted to talk a little bit about another tranche of lies that we are anticipating and ways that I think voters are confused. And that is really around election law changes. The attempt to discredit our democratic process has been underway for some time, and there are very granular, nitty-gritty details depending on your state and how or if there have been rule and or law changes made in the last few weeks, months, or years. And so for wherever you are as a reporter or news professional, definitely seek out those resources that can clarify if there have been changes in your state. To give you a snippet of this, here's what we know. These are facts. 43 states allow tabulation of mail-in ballots before to begin before election day. That's a really specific number. And so if you're in one of the states that isn't in the 43, it's good to know that. It's good to help convey that this is the state of the law. If you're in a state where people are claiming that early tabulation is starting, well, that's probably not illegal. That is probably in one of the states where that is allowed. There have been numerous election rule changes in various states. It is a hotly litigated issue right now. Again, I live in Georgia. I work in Georgia. There have been a number of cases that have just received a ruling last week. In Georgia, for example, the state election board sought to allow hand counting of ballots. That was considered unconstitutional last week by a judge. The election board wanted to reopen certification of the 2020 election, also put on hold. We've seen efforts to allow poll watchers to demand identification of individuals. All of these various provisions and rule changes have been struck down last week as unconstitutional. And that's just in one state. There are still other pending changes that are moving their way through Georgia courts. And I know that there are other states that are dealing with similar lawsuits and otherwise challenges. Dozens of lawsuits have been filed by GOP officials to discredit and change state processes. That really focuses on who qualifies to vote and the authority that officials have over the vote certification process. One example is in Pennsylvania, a lawsuit has been filed to disallow the counting of overseas ballots. And that they just had oral arguments last week in that case. So, depending on where you are, we will be in a very different place in all of these various legal challenges. As we speak, these cases are being heard. It's important for us to seek out and stay current on developments. And I'll just name this very clearly. I think many of these rule and law changes are really just thinly veiled, if at all veiled, attempts to make it harder for people to vote, to allow officials at the state level to reject the results of our elections, and to advance doubt about the legitimacy of our last general election and the upcoming one. So a lot of the same recycled lies have little seeds in these actions, just the discrediting, the delegitimizing of the entire process. All right. I'm going to hand it over to Vanessa Maria to kick us off on some of the other more granular. I feel like this is what you were all waiting for. Like, what do I do? How do I cover these issues? So take it away, Vanessa Maria.
Yeah, I just want to show this last slide is again more images that we've collected showing examples of disinformation about non-citizens voting, and as Nora mentioned before, really small statistically insignificant numbers of that, compared to the hundreds of millions of votes that have been cast in the last decade. So, why are we doing this? Nora is an attorney. I am actually a working journalist and educator because we believe that journalism is actually an antidote to disinformation. Along with things like media literacy and digital literacy, we believe that journalists, especially local journalists, have a really important role to play in providing truthful, verified information to their audiences. In full disclosure, I also work as a part-time journalist here in Philadelphia. I've been covering local government for more than 20 years, mostly on the radio, and I have covered many elections I'm also a bilingual reporter and Latina, and I'm keenly aware of how my community is disproportionately targeted for mis and disinformation, especially in regards to elections and electoral processes. So many of you are considered a trusted news source in your community. And so I might debunk something for a friend, but they might trust a local journalist or a news site more than a friend who maybe is telling them that's not so true. I know that's true even with my own mom, like if it's on Telemundo or Univision, she'll believe it, even though I'm like, I don't think that's real. If it comes from the TV news, then she'll be more likely to believe them. Also, your platform can reach the masses. I might be able to go online and DM a couple people and say, hey, that flyer that you're posted is not accurate. But I can only reach as many people in my network. If you have a platform that reaches thousands or tens or hundreds of thousands of people, that's really powerful, especially if you're on a broadcast platform, which can, in real time be able to let people know that there is disinformation floating around. Journalists, we have fact checking and verification skills. So I often, tell people in my community, if there's something that you think is not legitimate, like please reach out and send me and I can help you. And so many community leaders have taken me up on that when they see something on the internet they're not sure about sharing, and I've been happy to check that for them. We also believe that pre-bunking and debunking stories can really help inoculate audiences against disinformation. There's also a ton of research to prove that that works. We see a lot of headlines and tweets, and it gives people a lot of misleading information. And on many of our news platforms, we have the ability to do in-depth coverage to fully explain how a process works or how a law or policy impacts the public. Um, we also have the ability to get primary sources on record and verify data. So, we can reach out to our election officials or our elected officials and get them on record to set their record straight. We also have the ability to do data journalism, to look at information, and again, provide truthful, verified info to the public. I also think it's really important to document any and all attempts to undermine the election. I'm really thankful to all of the journalists who did that work in 2020, because we can look back and this is like why and how we've been able to anticipate a lot of that stuff. Making sure that that's part of the historical record is one of the functions of journalism. And also, some of these investigations can lead to accountability. So, if mail workers are, dumping or losing unwritten or incompleted mail-in ballots, that is something that needs to be addressed, right? And certainly, there's always, ability to improve processes and problems that are real. And so, by investigating these things, we can hold our local government election boards accountable when there are problems. So again, just to repeat some of the things that we're talking about, the prevailing lies and misleading narratives around voting logistics, voter fraud, voting machines not working properly, vote counting, false claims about election officials and harassment, and lies about non-citizens trying to vote in the election. I've been spending a lot of time mining different social media platforms. I also am part of many different chat groups, both on Telegram and WhatsApp. And I've seen firsthand videos, images, and pink slime news sites being circulated every single day with mis and disinformation about the election on many, if not all, of these issues. So let's take a look. In regards to voting logistics, again, it seems really basic, but it's important. I did voter outreach as a volunteer and not part of Free Press or any group, like literally just as a neighborhood resident 4 years ago. And one of the things that came up routinely when I tabled in the parks in my neighborhood was that people really did not know what the deadlines were for mail in ballots, for early voting. And almost everybody did not know where the polling locations were. And that's because in Philadelphia, they eliminated more than 100 polling locations. And so for many people, their polling location changed. And when I looked up that information on the city and state websites, it was linked as an Excel document. So, as you might imagine, many people accessing that information on their phones were not able to view it. So, we decided to make maps to show people where those were and to actually explain to them how and why their voting location was changed. Many people were upset and didn't understand why that was. And so we did some research to try to explain why that was and also how they can get rides or be able to access the new polling locations. But you would be surprised about how many people did not have this very basic information and how little Spanish language information this was available to my community. So a few of us decided to do that translation work to make sure that people at least were able to access through social media this important information in Spanish. I can say without a doubt, 4 years later, that there is so much more information available in Spanish, but we definitely have room to improve and put those things in other languages. So if you're part of the ethnic media, it is really critical that we research whether or not this information is available in the language of your community and if whether or not it's accessible. It's also really important to correct and debunk lies. Again, especially if you are serving immigrant communities or people that whose first language is not English. Again, there has been confusion about whether or not people can engage in early voting, and whether or not they can go early or stay late at some of the polling locations. So it is really important to communicate it, the exact lines and what happens if you're in line at a polling location and it closes. So this is from the Committee of 70, which is a nonprofit located in Philadelphia. I've worked with them a ton. They're great. They're a nonprofit. They provide tons of free education to the community here in Philly. And this is from their newsletter, which I am subscribed to. And here it gives a lot of logistical information about mail-in ballots, how to return it, how to drop it off. And on the bottom, you see the registration deadline is today. It also gives you a link to how to check your registration. They had many more things in that newsletter, but I wanted to recap this because this was great. Now, they're not a news outlet, but they are an organization that provides important information to the community, and we partner with them frequently as part of the news outlet that I work with, so that we can collaborate and share this important information. Here are examples again of newsrooms correcting that information. So on the left here, we actually found this image from the Dallas Morning News that went out. This article was published June 11th, 2024. And so I love the headline: "Another utterly ridiculous and false campaign mailer arrived in the homes of North Texas." And they did a whole story on it, which, for time, I'm not going to go over. But we can include some of these links in the follow-up email. And on the right, I found this on Instagram, and it's from the League of Women Voters, Austin and Co-op, which is a community radio station in Austin. Big fan of them. And they did a whole slide deck here on voter suspense list, which I don't know. This is in Texas. It doesn't have a whole lot of meaning to me, but they were clarifying that if you are on the voter suspense list, you cannot vote. And so they, again, were sharing that information to folks. So again, next we have like alleged voter fraud. What I've personally seen on social media are images showing, questionable behavior around the handling of ballots. So transporting ballots, hiding ballots, trashing ballots, that sort of thing. If you do see an image like that, it is really important to check the metadata on the image to try to find out where it originated. and to find out whether or not it was AI generated. Unfortunately, we have a lot more AI generated photos. I was telling Nora the other day that a friend had sent me a news headline. It was about a story in Lebanon at the Lebanon airport. It had a very dramatic photo of an airplane with lots of flames. And then about an hour later, my friend sent me another image. It said, this image is AI, do not circulate." And so I said, "Oh, they got you." And it happens to the best of us. Um, but of course, you want to make sure whatever image is being shared with you, you verify it. Um, so some of the things that we recommend is reporting on the role of local election officials. So if you have a board of elections, explain how they count the ballots, review the tallies, and ensure all ballots, including provisional ones, are cast legally. I know I had a lot of questions about provisional ballots, having completed one of those before, and whether or not they counted them. And so I asked election officials here locally what they do with them. I also had questions about where they're counting them, because in 2020, in Philadelphia, the mail-in ballots were counted at the convention center, and that lent itself to thousands of people coming out and celebrating and protesting and hanging out in front of the convention center, waiting for the news. And I found out that this year they have moved a location to another part of the city into a warehouse to avoid any potential violence or protests related to that vote counting. Inform the public about how votes are verified and explain the timeline for results at the local and state level. These timelines are really important to me here in Pennsylvania. And one of the things, again, we learned is that attempts to change the law in regards to when mail in ballots can be counted failed. So, Pennsylvania is one of the 7 states where we have to wait until 7 a.m. on election day to begin counting the ballots. That means, if we're doing an election night special, which we usually do at our radio station, we're going to have to prepare for not having those results that night. So as a result, we have to come up with other content, and we also have to plan for that week of when we would announce the votes. And so we were told it can take several days. And so to be on standby for that. In other states, they have changed the law. They've already started counting mail-in ballots. And so the results will be available that night or sooner. Remind audiences that a national election result can take days to determine, which is not proof of a corrupt or rigged electoral process. Again, people need to understand that for many reasons. I know in 2020, because of COVID and the pandemic and concerns around public health, there was a huge increase, record numbers of mail-in ballots, and a lot of people did not understand why it was taking the mail-in ballots to be counted for so long. So explaining, all of these factors, interviewing people that can speak to that will help, people understand, that this is normal and what to expect. And so again, report on any changes to vote counting rules your state has made since 2020. So again, here's 2 more stories. Again, a lot of them are Philly stories. Um, but I thought CBS affiliate did a great job of explaining how your vote is counted in Pennsylvania, a look at integrity in Philadelphia and the surrounding counties. And they even included a video of it was called The Life of a Ballot from the Montgomery County Board of Elections. And it kind of shows, like, after you complete your ballot, where it goes, what bins, how it's transported, who are the people doing it, what happens after it's been counted. And I thought that was so interesting. And so, yeah, again, working with your county officials, they're already making media and showing people then to collaborate and share that information. And this was an excellent article in the Philadelphia Inquirer that came out this week. And it was written by 3 journalists there. What PA election officials are scared about heading into November. So this is an article that details all of the Pennsylvania related misinformation, litigation, and potential certification delays. Now, I will say that this article was behind a paywall and I am a subscriber, so I was able to access it. It is my personal opinion that articles like these should probably made free, at least, from now until election day. Just because it really is critical information, and many folks, many newsrooms made critical information available for free when the COVID-19 pandemic began. And I thought it was so important to be able to make that information accessible during these times. So again, we're going to see a lot of voter fraud lawsuits. That's one thing we can anticipate. So again, working with attorneys who can understand, how those have been filed. I will be hitting up Nora, my colleague, to understand what's happening in Pennsylvania. But you want to be reporting, what evidence is being shared, what claims they're making, and what the results of those are. Some of those lawsuits have been settled very quickly. Some of them take a lot longer to settle and go to the highest courts. And so here was an article from ABC 11 in North Carolina about a lawsuit, from the GOP there to throw out voters of military members, and it said that there was no evidence of any such fraud. Um, Next, investigating the kinds of voter systems that are used locally and how voters can safely use them and how they can meet all applicable requirements of the election code. Again, admittedly, I didn't know what kind of voter machines we used in Philadelphia. So I checked on the state's website and there was a whole page full of resources all about the election machines. And so it has all these documents, certification and testing, all of the document even has instructional videos on how to use them. I have a link here, but again, because of time, I'm not going to go into it, but we'll share these links with the examples. And then our local public radio station, WHYY in Philly, they did a really great article, everything you need to know about PA's voting machines, how the state keeps them safe, and more. Again, a lot of this content is designed to clarify any misinformation and to build trust with audiences in the electoral system. This issue is really serious, and one of the things I'm most worried about, and this is the harassment of election workers. I am friends with people that work the polls, and they are also concerned. We've heard a lot of rumors of people planning to go to the polls to do poll watching. And there's a lot of questions that poll workers have, like, what to do when that happens and whether or not they're allowed to be there. And of course, there are regulations in every state that will determine what people are and aren't allowed to do, from everything to standing outside to giving out flyers to going inside to filming and taking pictures and potentially harassing people. So investigate what the county and state where you are doing to ensure the physical security of election workers and the ballots themselves, not just on election day, but through the tabulation of the vote and its certification by Congress on January 6, 2025. Report on any instances of intimidation, threats, and or violence to election workers. Same thing, claims will be made. They will not all be true. You must investigate them. When I was working the election last year, a poll worker who is a friend contacted me to say that there were election monitors at their polling location and that they were very threatening and they didn't know what to do and if I could look into it. And she took a picture of a letter that they sent to find out who they were. And apparently, they were officials from Washington, from the Department of Justice, and they had actually been sanctioned to do some election monitoring. So I did find out that they were legitimate and it had been part of some initiative in Pennsylvania to come in and do that monitoring. However, for whatever reason, that was not communicated to the ward leaders and the polling location that they showed up to. So that created a lot of fear and chaos. And if they had just communicated that, that would have alleviated that. But thankfully, I was able to verify because I'm a journalist. why they were there and why they were mandated to be there. Luckily, nothing happened. They just came and stood around and they left. But again, as a journalist, you might get the same sort of calls with concerns from polling workers. Luckily, this turned out to be much ado about nothing. And here I have, some statistics from local election official survey from 2022 that said that 1 in 4 local election officials experienced abuse, harassment, or threats as part of their work in the last 2 years. Of those, 62% were politically based threats. So that's a lot of people. And then on the right, intimidation and harassment of Michigan election workers could land violators in prison under new legislation. And this was an article by VoteBeat, which was really good. Nora talked again about election law changes. So I think it's really important to explain the election certification process at the county and state level. So as I was preparing for this year's election, I did look into how local counties certify elections and how then that gets sent up to the statewide officials and the Secretary of State. Again, there's different processes in every state. So, being as though I'm in Philadelphia, we also report on things happening in New Jersey and Delaware, and there are differences in how that occurs in the tri state area. Um, I think one of the things that was interesting that, I learned. Is that when there are cases of election fraud, that delaying or not participating in the election certification process is actually not a legitimate way to report election or voter fraud in your county. So this is a tactic that we've seen be employed in the 2020 election, and in Pennsylvania and Luzerne County that happened. So we anticipate that might happen again. So we have a responsibility to explain how this process is supposed to work. And also, in some states, it is not legal to do that, or the election workers can be sued. And we have seen workers face, you know, actual felony charges and lawsuits because they delayed, deliberately the election certification process. Again, report on the specific statutes in place in your state for when an election official refuses to certify an election, the remedies that are available to federal authorities to protect the certification of the election, and verify claims of ballot destruction, especially in swing states. So that's my state. Even a small percentage of destroyed ballots might jeopardize the ability of election officials to determine the winner of the election in those close races. So here's an article from the AP reporting on several states are making late changes to election rules, even as voting is set to begin. I think this is a repeated slide, but this is claims of non-citizens voting in US elections on the left, and on the right, I went to politifact.com, and again, it says cases of non-citizens voting are statistically rare. Some non-citizens actually accidentally end up on the voter rolls when applying for driver's license. States and counties have safeguards to check for voter eligibility. So lastly, I'll end like this is a lot of information. Some people are in very small newsrooms like myself. There's literally 4 of us that work in a media cooperative, and we have a couple of freelancers. So we have to be very choosy about what we can cover just for capacity issues and resource issues. Obviously, if you're part of a larger newsroom, you might have an entire team, but you still have to delegate. And so, one of the things that we recommend, and it's part of the work that I do with News Voices, is assessing what your community's information needs are so that you can prioritize what's most important. Some strategies involved in that are community mapping. So, identifying the organizations, leaders, and groups who are already engaged with elections, voting, and civic processes. Ask them what the biggest challenges are to their work, what types of stories are underreported, and how you can be of service to providing accurate information to the public. Community listening, attending events, and hosting events that give residents an opportunity to give feedback about their information needs, how stories are covered, and how they want to be engaged or communicated with. So I went to an event last week where they were organizing Latinas to get the vote out for Kamala Harris. And I interviewed, not for a story, but just asking the canvassers about their work knocking on doors in North Philadelphia and what people were saying to them and what kinds of information people asked them about. And they just yielded such important information about what residents were talking about. And they advocated for the media to cover certain things. So I greatly appreciated talking to them and getting more information about, what stories to cover. Again, being out in the community at election and get out the vote events, one-on-one with community members, being active in neighborhood social media groups, delivering information on their preferred platforms. And so again, I oftentimes, report these things on the radio, knowing that a lot of people in my community don't listen to the radio. I'll take that same information and put it on WhatsApp, or I will DM people on Instagram or Messenger on Facebook to make sure they get the information so that either way, whether they catch it on our weekly radio program or they get a DM from me, they're gonna, find the correct information. So now I'm gonna turn it over to Nora, talk about this quote and why it's significant.
Oof, so much. And we don't have a lot left, y'all. We are coming down towards the end of the hour. I've tried to answer as many questions in the chat as possible, and I believe that those answered will be visible to attendees. So thank you for everyone who has submitted questions. Please keep submitting them. Um, I mean, Vanessa Maria is being far too elegant. She found this quote, and I think it's such an amazing one. It's from the Philadelphia Inquirer from just last week about the timeline. And as promised, we conceived of this training not just to give you the tools and the tactics before the election, but to anticipate how lies won't suddenly or miraculously stop on November 5th or 6th. And so I think there's something important here. Um, as we've seen, this is Seth Bluestein, the lone Republican of the Philly City Commissioners. He oversees those city elections, and he said the window of time from when the polls close until when the race is called is still our biggest risk window for mis and disinformation. It's really that misinformation that leads to harassment and threats. And I don't know about you, but I often clear my calendar on November 5th and 6th. I don't have meetings. I'm sitting around. And what am I doing? I'm refreshing my screen on social media over and over and over, and on the New York Times and the AP. And I would say that, it's a great moment to unplug and trust. There will be incredible incendiary and fear mongering claims in this period. And we must remember that this window is very potent for lies to spread, and for all of us waiting for results, waiting for something. We'll be with our guards down, and I think at the most vulnerable moment. So I want to walk you through some of the timeline that we have laid out, and our colleagues at Protect Democracy have a really great graphic here about the highest risk election dates. That is not to say that other dates will somehow be immune, or we can ignore various lies in our communities. But I think that these are really important inflection points to remember. And so we know that early and mail in voting is already underway. That has started, and many, many states have mail in ballots that will begin being tabulated. Um, it's important for you all in your coverage to be able to convey to voters at the most basic level. Voting has begun. That is wonderful. Check your status. If you need to request a mail in ballot, do so. Election day is November 5th. These might feel like rudimentary reminders, and yet they are essential to the democratic process. They are also high risk moments where election lies, potential violence could be at their highest. During November and through December 11th is the certification and the tabulation process. That is where a lot can happen. Early reporting on in process counts can potentially give the impression of a blue or a red wave. And so be on guard as a reporter, as a member of the public, that depending on the order in which mail in ballots are counted, premature calls of results by other outlets, all of that is at risk of causing confusion, misleading the public, and maybe even scaring people. Spikes in misinformation in that November and December period are already pretty known. It could be more claims of fraud. It could be ballot tampering or destruction, replacement, ballot mules. This is a period where all of those recycled lies will be rearing their head. On December 17th, the state electors convene. That is to vote for president and vice president. They have, as state electors, until December 25th to transmit their votes to the US archivist, who must transmit those results to Congress by January 3rd. And so it's actually a pretty technical set of dates. It's like you have your tabulation, your certification, electors are convening. They, by December 5th, will transmit their votes. This is a moment where coercion or violence targeting state electors will be at its highest. And so remember that there could be convenings at state capitals that have a risk of becoming targets of violence. As we have seen in previous years from the 2021 attempt by individuals to stop the certification process, there is a lot that happens once Congress convenes. And the counts for electoral votes are gathered. The newly elected Congress will be sworn in, and threats of violence or what we call parliamentary actions could interfere with certification. We saw that in 2021. It was a dangerous threat to the peaceful transition of power. And there, of course, are reasons to believe that those who have already claimed that the election is rigged may be unwilling to accept results. And so reporters have to be very clear, but also help turn down the temperature for audiences, for readers, that these processes have held and that we must put faith in the rule of law. Um, I want to talk for one final moment now about what we're doing. You know, we're doing trainings like this, of course, but what else? Well, we are monitoring prevalent and emergent lies across various media channels, traditional and social media. We're providing trainings and resources for media professionals. And when you get off today of this training, you will receive a link to our YouTube video, our resource guide that summarizes recycled and new election lies that we anticipate. So all of that is a tremendous set of resources for you. We are documenting the performance of social media platforms. How are they, if at all, monitoring themselves and enforcing their own policies? Are they applying policies to misinformation that could lead to real world violence? We are investigating and documenting the performance of many platforms. We're pushing for stronger integrity commitments, human staffing at these companies. And of course, we're bringing people together through various events. We're guiding the public. In many ways, our Democracy Is initiative is an invitation to reimagine and to reinvigorate what democracy could mean for all of us. This initiative, you can go to the next slide, Vanessa Maria, is something that we've been working on for months. And I encourage you to check out democracyis.net. We have resources for the public on ways that they can protest, get engaged in their civic process. We have resources for newsrooms like this one here, Old and New Lies. We have a checklist for how newsrooms can address election related disinformation. We have a public opinion poll on how people feel about their election. We have found that a minority of Americans feel very informed about the local elections that they are set to vote in the next 2 weeks. And we would encourage you to check out resources like Harkin and Election SOS, Trusting News, Skyline, the Brennan Center, Fact Checkeando. Fact Checkeando is doing a tremendous job looking at lies in Spanish and fact checking those. PolitiFact is another fact checking tool. So these are some of the resources before you. I see that we've gotten some more questions in the chat. So for those who can stay for one extra minute, we are happy to address some of this. I answered as many as I could, so take a look at the answered. I think that For now, Vanessa Maria, is there anything that has jumped out? I see, thank you for sharing this information. Someone said, I will be sharing with friends and family. Yay. Thank you, Susan. We had another one. Will there be claims of fraud? I think there are very real reasons to believe there will be claims of fraud. And in this moment, each of us has a role to play. That is not in any way to shirk or minimize the role media and tech have to play. But if you know that temperatures and emotions are high, help your friends and family. Take the temperature down. Say, let's wait and see. And for the moments where there are credible threats of violence, where there are claims that you know are wrong, try your best to engage with those. Help share information with close loved ones, share and help people engage directly in the voting process. We will follow up with materials for you so that this is not the end. And if you feel like you're still floundering or you have questions, we are available. Vanessa Maria and I are both available. You can always email Free Press at info@freepress.net. Thank you all. Vanessa Maria, final last words.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Again, this is a collaborative effort, right? I would even argue to say it's an all hands on deck moment. I hope that we're wrong, right? That if that's the worst case scenario, right? That nothing happens and it will all be for naught, then we're sorry we waste your time. But I do think that preparing, having sources lined up, researching these things, forming those relationships in your community with the proper authorities and with trusted organizations really is worth the investment. And so, even beyond election day, it's really important to continue to provide civic media, civic journalism to our communities to keep them engaged, not just through elections, but throughout the year. And of course, we have a really big role to play in keeping our elected officials accountable and making sure to track the laws and policies and campaign promises they propose. So definitely stay tuned with us. Follow us on social media and feel free to reach out if you want to continue to collaborate or share resources that you think our supporters would find valuable. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you all.